Hey guys, I just want to welcome you back to a new section of single case research methods for special education. Today we'll be talking about important concepts and some ethical concerns. So to begin, we're going to review some of the concepts from last week. First of all, baseline logic regards the participant serving as his or her own control to indicate the effects of the independent variable on the dependent variable, comparing data from the dependent variable prior to intervention and comparing it to intervention data. All right, and we need at least 3 replications of effect. Told you replication was important, and we're going to be talking about that a lot as we go through. Now, confounding variables and bias have to be controlled and accounted for. To review some of this new vocabulary, I want to share with you Mark's vignette, and then we can talk about the vocabulary as it relates to a real teaching and a real life scenario. Mark is an 8-year-old student early in his 3rd grade year of school. Mark's parents have reported to his school district that Mark has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. He was diagnosed when his parents were concerned about reports of Mark's behavior that were interfering with his learning and the learning of other students. Some of the behaviors that were identified include getting out of his seat frequently and without permission, speaking out of turn when in large group or small group settings, making frequent careless errors in his work, being easily distracted, and difficulty sustaining attention sufficiently to complete independent work. Mark began receiving medication to control the symptoms of his condition, but his pediatrician also stressed that Mark would need to learn to independently control his impulsive behaviors to the extent possible. The school personnel were very much on board with the pediatrician's recommendations. Prior to Mark's diagnosis, it was observed by his teachers that daily he did not complete the 20 computational math problems assigned for independent math within the allotted 10-minute time period. Additionally, she noted that all the problems he did complete, his average accuracy was only 50% of all completed problems correct. It was decided Mark's learning objective would be, when presented with independent math work, Mark will complete 20 problems within the allotted time and with 80% or better accuracy for 5 consecutive assignments. Mark was to be rewarded for meeting his learning objective by placing a star on a chart on his desk that would be used to record his progress. With each star achieved, he would be verbally praised by the teacher and receive 5 minutes of free time at the end of the day to engage in appropriate activity of his choice. When he obtained 5 consecutive stars, he would be rewarded with an additional reinforcer of selecting an appropriate class fun activity for up to 30 minutes duration. The team, comprised of Mark's parents, Mark, and the school personnel, agreed that if Mark would be able to achieve this level of competence for 5 consecutive assignments, he would have learned to complete his work accurately and would no longer need additional rewards of this star chart and free time. Instead, the teacher and aide would continue to occasionally praise him for maintaining his independent and accurate work. The team also considered that if the behavior intervention plan to improve Mark's math work was successful, the same reward system might also be applied to other behaviors of Mark, such as completing his daily journal entries with the allotted time and with 80% correct or better spelling. Later, after the team meeting, Mark's parents told Mark that if he completed his math learning objective successfully, they would take him for a day trip to Cedar Point Amusement Park on Lake Erie, his favorite family outing. Eventually, Mark was successful in completing his math learning objective, and the same reinforcement system was implemented to improve spelling on daily journal entries. Here's what Mark's progress on his math learning objective and implementation of the reinforcement system with his journal entry writing. You can see that his baseline data were pretty low, and once the reinforcement system was put into place, we have a accelerating trend until he meets the criterion of 5 consecutive assignments met. The reward system was taken away, and they continued to take some follow-up data to see if he continued to show success on his math. At that time, they started the system with journal writing, and you can see a low level of percent correctly spelled words when the journal entry is completed on time, but maybe a slight accelerating trend here. but an immediate jump in level and trend when the system was put in place was seen. So we could see that this was, at first glance, at least correlational data to say when the reinforcement system was in place, Mark was motivated to be more successful. Hi. I want to go over some basic concepts and terms and try to relate them to Mark as much as possible. First of all, the term subjects is a historical term for individuals, such as Mark, in single case studies who are involved in changing their own behaviors. Now, you might be saying to yourself, hey, I thought this was single case research. Well, recently, considering ethical issues through the APA manual, it was decided that instead of using the term subjects, we would use the word case in terms of single case research. But they can be used interchangeably. Single subject research methodology and design is the same as single case research methods and design. So, because more recently the term participants has come into common use because it suggested that a willing individual who has given informed consent to the procedures of the study and is actively involved and vested in the study outcomes is the participant, not a subject. Next, the terms independent variable and dependent variable are used to describe the elements in a study that relate to the demonstration of a functional relation. Independent variable is the intervention used to encourage change in behavior. The dependent variable is used to measure that change that's demonstrated by the desired outcome of the study. If a functional relation exists, the dependent variable should change in accordance with the presence or absence of changes in the independent variable. The dependent variable is the target behavior. Although technically they could be different, where a target behavior might be speaking louder, but the dependent variable might be decibel measurement of the actual loudness. But overall, they are the same. So we can use those generally interchangeably. Extraneous variables are any elements of a study that are not the independent variable. Confounding variables are those extraneous variables that confuse or obscure the outcomes or the believability that the independent variable and dependent variable share a functional relationship. Independent variable in Mark's vignette would be the reinforcement system, including the star chart, praise, and the free time awarded for every successful assignment, as well as the ultimate 30-minute activity reinforcer for completion of his objective if he reaches the required level of problems completed with appropriate accuracy for 5 consecutive assignments. The dependent variable or target behavior in the Mark's vignette is completing math work in the specific time period and with at least 80% accuracy for the completed problems. Note, the target behavior included 3 dimensions: the number of problems to be completed, the specified time period in which to complete them, and the level of accuracy required. At least 16 of 20 problems, or 80% completed correctly. To simplify data collection, the teacher decides to record and graph the number of problems completed correctly within the allotted time. There is at least one possible extraneous or confounding variable. Mark was successful, but the team can be less sure if it was actually the reinforcement system that encouraged the behavior change, or was it the trip to Cedar Point, or was it the combination of the two? Also, if successful, it might be confounding as to whether the seat chart, praise, 5-minute individual activity, or the 30-minute class activity might have had more or less impact on Mark's performance. That might seem irrelevant if Mark has achieved success, but from a researcher's perspective, it would be difficult for a researcher to make a firm assertion if it was the school-based reinforcement system and specific components of that system that really accounted for the change in Mark's behavior. If Mark is successful in also changing his spelling in the journal writing with only the school-based reinforcement system in effect, no more trips to Cedar Point, then the functional relation between the independent variable, or the reinforcement system, and the dependent variable, the math target behavior and journal writing target behavior, might be considered stronger. However, it could still be confounding as to which aspect of the reinforcement system may have had the greater impact on Mark changing his behavior. Single case design research uses experiments in which an outcome measure is assessed repeatedly within and across different phases that are defined by the presence or absence of an intervention. The case is a student or classroom, or even a teacher, the unit of intervention administration and data analysis. There's a standard for review of single case design approach created by the What Works Clearinghouse. They consider the rating of the studies, the level of evidence in each study, whether there is enough research for evidence to be reported, the rating of effectiveness. The current criteria for determining the rating of effectiveness for an intervention is as follows. Was the independent variable systematically manipulated, with at least 5 data points in each condition? Was there a graphic illustration of evidence? Were there at least 3 attempts to demonstrate the effect? Strong evidence would have at least 3 demonstrations of effect and no non-effects. And lastly, if measures of effectiveness can be attributed solely to the intervention. There are 2 primary designs that we talked about in our initial class meeting. First is the ABAB withdrawal or reversal design. This is where we have alternating conditions, a baseline condition, an intervention condition, and a replication of the baseline condition and a replication of the intervention condition. It's our standard best practice. However, like I said, if behaviors are not reversible like that, we might choose to use the multiple baseline design. And here we stagger the different baselines across time. So we can show baseline levels remain stable and constant, and data only change, the dependent variable only changes when the intervention is put in place, showing experimental control and 3 replications of effect. So the logic of these designs is that each design includes phases or periods of time in which baseline or intervention are presented. Data across these conditions serve 3 purposes: description, prediction, and testing predictions, or showing control with those tests. You should remember the dependent variable is your target behavior. That changes when the independent variable or independent variable is in place or not. And any confounding variables obscure those findings, perhaps indicating alternate explanations of those changes. As we move through the course, you'll be considering the applied nature of single-case research, internal validity, the degree to which the research design controls for extraneous confounding variables, or variables that could support an alternative explanation for the findings, like Sesame Street, or maturation, or repeated testing. External validity, or selection bias, tells us how far the results of the study can be generalized. The number of study participants matters. It also matters how those participants were selected. Was there a pre-specified selection criteria where everyone was included who met that criteria? A greater external validity will be assigned to studies whose participants are randomly assigned and all included. Studies with fewer participants may be systematically replicated over time to show greater external validity. So, there's our review of the important concepts that we've learned so far. But I do want to move forward and look at social validity. You'll want to make sure you've read the Wolf et al. 1978 article before moving forward with the next presentation on social validity. But until then, stay tuned.